The TV show Ghost Whisperer, you were the show creator?
Well, here's how that show came about. I had been doing a lot of movies for CBS at that time, and I had no interest in TV series. I didn't want to direct episodes. I didn't have disdain for it. It just wasn't something I was interested in. I just liked the idea of the same characters all the time. So I always avoided it. And there was an executive who I liked very much named Bella Bajaria at CBS. And she called me one day and said that she had just met this woman. And I think she met her through James Van Praagh, the famous psychic. And this woman had been brought to LA because her talent is that she can make ghosts who are haunting you go away. She can see them if they're earthbound, and she can convince them to cross over. And so there were people at CBS who were having problems that they felt were being caused by ghosts in their house. And when James told them about this woman, Mary Ann, who lived in Ohio, they brought her in. And apparently it was very successful. She immediately identified who their ghosts were and got rid of them. So Bella called me and said, look, whether you believe any of this or not, I think there might be a series here. There might be something about this woman, and you should meet her. And so I was in LA, and Mary Ann was, because she had cleared their houses. So I did, sure, I'll be happy to meet her. And we met at a Starbucks in Studio City. And I walked in and I'm expecting to see some like ethereal looking, person. But instead is this very solid, down to earth, just salt of the earth kind of woman. And with her husband, who was an ex-Marine, buzz cut, tattoos, And I sat there and talked with them, and she was so wonderful and kind and funny and good-hearted. And, wasn't full of herself, didn't feel like she had the answers to all the world's problems. Her thing is she grew up being able to see ghosts, and she learned how to make them go away. And so I really became fascinated by this because, of course, I love horror. I love Gothic horror. And so I asked her, I said, well, so you just see ghosts all the time? And she said, yeah, I can't turn it off. She said, I try not to let them sometimes know that I see them because then they bother me. So they want something from me. So I said, well, how about right now? And so, yeah, there's 3 ghosts right here in the Starbucks. And she explained to me, that guy over there, I think it's probably his mother. She's looking at him. She doesn't seem to be very approving. And this person over here, I think it might be his son. And it was kind of really, like the hair on my neck kind of went up a little bit. And that scene, by the way, is in the pilot of the show. And so I drove away thinking, wow, so, Gothic horror, ghost stories with character-driven drama. I thought this could be a great way to meld those 2 passions of mine. And so I called the executive back. I said, yeah, I'd love to write this pilot, and who knows. And so we made a deal, and I wrote the pilot. And I thought, I'll write this, and then I'll go on back to my regular life making movies because, what's the chance of a pilot being made? And I've never written a pilot that'll be very interesting. So I wrote the pilot, and they really liked the pilot, and they said, let's shoot it. I said, okay, wow. So, well, I've never made a pilot. It'll be fun to do a pilot. It'll never go to series because the mortality rate is huge in these things. So I shot the pilot, and they said, okay, we like this pilot. Let's do 13 episodes. And then I really got panicky. I thought, my God, I have to do this 13 more times, come up with stories. How can I do this? But we did it, and we got a great writing staff together, and Mary Ann was very helpful. She, consulted on a lot of things. And it was an opportunity for me to really deal with all my fears about death and grief and loss. And that's how I approached the show. It was my chance to work through all my issues about this stuff. And at the same time, to try to treat death in a way that could maybe give somebody some hope. Maybe there is something a little more than we know out there. And so I got really turned on by it. And that's, then little did I know I would spend the next 5 years of my life basically making that show. And it was a wonderful experience. We had a great cast. There was, everyone got along. There was no drama behind the camera. It was just a really wonderful experience. And I loved it as a filmmaker because of the speed. I would get an idea, go home, write it, and I could literally see it on the air in 4 weeks. And, it was a hit show. A lot of people watched it, and we got a lot of amazing and very moving feedback from people. And it was just a tremendous experience. And we did one episode because I was trying to work out my fear of flying. Oh, like I still don't quite get flight. I don't understand how we can sit in this kerosene-filled tube and hurtle through space at 600 miles an hour, and somehow we know where we're going and we land in this exact spot. 5 hours later, I just don't get how that works or why it works. And so every time I'm in a plane, I think at some point, God is going to look down and say, "What do you think they're doing? They can't do that." So I fly all the time, as we have to, but I'm terrified of it. So I did an episode where a plane crashed in their town, and Melinda comes out of her store and sees this billowing smoke, from where the crash was, and then coming up the street are 150 ghosts who just came off this plane. And so it was a double episode that we did, and it was fantastic for me in every way, because I could through the other characters, I could deal with not only the fear of flying, but this whole idea of mass loss and grieving and how do you let it go and all that stuff. And so they were very successful episodes. I'm still afraid of flying, but it was a good example of why I love working on that show. I could just work out so much of this stuff.
Were there certain areas that she couldn't go into because it was just too many ghosts and it was too tragic for her?
Not really. I mean, there were moments where she felt the heaviness of tragedy and, she'd be depressed. I'm talking about the real Marianne. Yeah. And, but for the most part, and there was, when she actually crossed somebody over, there was really she did it all sort of mentally. She would just kind of go into this, she'd just be quiet, and she's communicating with this ghost mentally, and she'd say, "Okay, he's gone." What? So on the show, of course, we had to kind of pretty that up a bit. We had to have we never did the light or anything, but we always did interesting ways for people to cross over and look magical and fun, and sometimes scary. But it was just it's one of the highlights of my life doing that show.
Is it still available for people to watch? I know the series is no longer.
It is. It's on Hulu, I think. It's all over. And it's playing all over the world. I mean, there's never a moment where it's not playing somewhere. It's amazing. It's like 127 different countries. People really loved it. And I think that the reason it struck a chord is not because it's such a brilliant show or, it's not art. But I think that after 9/11, we came on in 2005, so we weren't that far out. But I really think there was a hunger out there for hope and to try to find some way to believe that there's more beyond, that there's maybe I think it just gave people an appetite for wanting to believe that there's just more than just what we're seeing here. And I really think that's what struck. Certainly a lot of the letters we got spoke to that. It was pretty great.
Can you take us into the writer's room for Ghost Whisperer? So how would you structure different episodes? How would the writers work with each other?
Well, that's an interesting question because I never quite got comfortable in the writer's room environment. It was one of you could probably say one of my failings as a showrunner, I suppose. But having been a solitary writer for 25 years of my career at the time I started that show, it suddenly became really difficult to sit in a room. And we had a great staff, smart. We had playwrights. We had really smart people in that room. And to be able to instantly identify ideas, that's good, that's bad, that's good, that's bad, that's good. I found it really difficult because I just I'm used to the page and the keyboard and thinking through everything, not necessarily slowly, but on my own, without anybody watching the process, or being asked to deliver an instant verdict on something. So I found it really difficult. I listened to someone's idea. Wow, that's great. That's a great idea. And somebody else had it. That's even better. Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. And I'd be confused. I wouldn't. I would always have to take all the stuff and go back to my desk and try to make my own sense of it. So after a while, what we did was we would convene in the writer's room at the beginning of the season and lay out basic, big things we wanted to do in terms of themes and also just story arcs and where we're going to bring this character through. By the end of the season, we want them to be here. And then when we started getting comfortable enough that we had scripts to start writing, we would just go back to our own offices and start writing. And then basically I would then work with the writers one-on-one, which I was much more comfortable with than being in the atmosphere of a free-for-all kind of room. And the network would get upset about this. They were like, well, it's not the way we do it. Well, it's the way I do it, and it seems to be working. And the writers seem to like it. They seem to like having the one-on-one attention. And if they collectively came up with a problem or something to solve, they were free to convene the room without me if I wasn't there, if I might have been directing or something. And then they could call on the power of the room to solve a thorny plot problem. But, pretty much I worked, kind of one-on-one. And then in the third season, I was getting a little bit anxious to move on. I felt like it got to the point where I would be on a set and I could no longer think of a different way to shoot the set. I've been in this kitchen now, how many times? So I was anxious to try to do different things, although I still love the show. So we brought in a great showrunner named P.K. Simmons. And he and I worked together in season 3. And then he took over in season 4 and 5. And I had the great opportunity then of just writing and directing a couple of episodes a season. They would just say, which one do you want to do? Okay, I'm going to do these. And that was really great because I was free then of the note sessions from the network. And, I could just be a filmmaker and make these movies and then develop other things I wanted to develop. And PK took the show in really interesting directions and it continued to do really well in the ratings. And, the transition was pretty seamless. And so, it was a 5-year run and it changed my life in many ways. And, the profits from that show helped me make my short films, which I'm really grateful for. And I've made friendships on the show that, to this day I still maintain. And, it was a very golden time as a filmmaker who loves the process of being on the set. I love directing. I love working with the actors and the crew. I love the cameras. I love everything about it. So to be able to do it so often, was just so great. Because, TV, we were making 22 of these a year, 22 hours a year. So I could be directing a bunch of them. It was a great experience, lots of fun.
But then in terms of the writing, it sounds like because you were used to being a solitary writer, standing at a desk or whatever your process was, I think that would be difficult for a lot of people, a room with many different agendas, even if everything's harmonious, just to have so much going on.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but so the democracy of it threw me. Because, as a solitary writer, you're just used to you get your own ideas, you vet them, you throw them out, you accept them. But now you suddenly have to learn how to accept new ideas. And for a series, it's really important. You can't be just one person's vision, really, to make a good series. You need people who can bring different skill sets to the table. And we had that on Ghost Whisperer, and I feel like we made good use of that, even though we had a rather unusual structure. Though when PK came in, he had grown up in the room system. And so for season 3, 4, and 5, we had the room. And everybody, was great with it. And the room is also a trap because you've got a room full of 8 really bright people. And, you start telling stories and it's funny. And, half a day goes by and your sides hurt from laughing so much. But oops, we didn't really solve episode 3, did we? So there was a lot of that too.
And a lot of great food, I'm sure, too.
Yes, too much food, really difficult. And we were at Universal. And, what's crazy about Universal is that the tram, the tourist tour, and I can tell all you tourists, they do go through everywhere where movies are really being made. Because we would just have to, right outside the writer's room, the tram would go by, and here's the famous room where all these TV shows are written. Yeah. So one of our writers, Catherine Butterfield, developed tram theater, where they'd be bored, and they would, when they saw a tram coming, they'd go outside on the little sidewalk outside our writer's room, and they would start arguing with each other. They start a fight. They start, it's something to give the tram people something to look at when they walk by. So, the highlight of their day was tram theater. So this is the kind of thing that could happen in the room.
Did every episode of Ghost Whisperer have the same structure?
Yes, that was, one thing about CBS. And again, it's a funny story because when I sold, even though they came to me with this notion, I had to fashion a pitch and I had to go back to them and say, okay, here's how I would do this show. And they said, great, do it. And one of the top executives said to me was, what we love about your pitch is that it's not like anything else we have on the air. And I said, great. And then we started the development process, during which they made it as much as possible like every other show they had on the air. It was just funny. It's like they can't help themselves. It's like this knee-jerk reaction. However, having said that, you also have to respect the fact that at least then, I'm not sure about now, but then CBS was the top network. They were knocking it out of the park. So you can't argue with that kind of success. Someone somewhere knows what they're doing. So I try to have a good attitude about it, and I want to have a successful show. So I took their notes, and we tried to make them as much as possible doable and not violate, what we felt the show could stand for. And we would push back sometimes, and they'd back off. If we made a good argument for them, they weren't just dictatorial about it. But it was kind of interesting how it became more of a procedural about how to solve a mystery every week. And that's a CBS brand, really, is every show they do, whether it's CSI, whatever it is, it's a procedural. So that was the biggest kind of template that they imposed on it, was that we had to stick to this thing. But I tried to encourage them to let us do some serialization where we could have a character who shows up in this episode and then again 4 episodes later and continue their story over an arc of episodes. And they resisted that at first. Nope, we want close-ended episodes. We don't want a situation where someone watches episode 5 and they didn't see episode 2 or 3, and we want them to feel they've missed nothing. We want to know that they're watching this and they can just pick up where they left off. And I said, yes, I get that, but it's dull. So can we just, for those who might want something a little more, can we add a little thing in here? And they finally started letting us do it, just little by little. We would bring in these characters who were either ghosts or represented the dark side of ghosts. And it became more interesting for all of us then to make the show because we had a little more going on than just a simple story that had to be solved, in 40 minutes every week.
Did viewer feedback factor in to different things in the story?
I don't remember ever having that happen. We got a lot of great touching. We got a letter once from a gravedigger. And this guy was saying how he sees this grief all the time at cemeteries. And he's just this invisible person. No one really pays attention to the gravedigger. But, I always wanted to do an episode like that. And I'm not sure why we never did, but it was a very moving letter. And he was talking about how much he loved the show and how much it meant to him emotionally. And it helped him deal more positively with some of the things that he saw just in his job every day. Kids weeping and so we got a lot of moving. We got another letter once from an older man, and he was saying how much he loved watching the show with his wife, and he would hold her hand throughout the whole show. But as the letter went on, it became clear that his wife was dead and not with him anymore. And so we had this. So we get these letters that would just give us goosebumps and we'd love. However, the things that did affect oftentimes, which was never fun for us, CBS would have a knee-jerk reaction to something that would happen on one of their other shows. So, for instance, if a character behaved in a certain way in an episode of The Mentalist or something else that was on then, and the ratings dropped a fraction of a point during that scene, they come back and say, okay, no, in your show, your next episode, you got someone doing this, can't do that. We dropped on that one, we can't do it. And be like, come on, But we'd have to respect that and do that, And I always felt that was a little bit, and I envied shows that had enough episodes in the can where they had enough lead time so they couldn't really respond that quickly. But we oftentimes were only a couple of weeks ahead of airing when we were shooting, so that was the only thing that outside influence that really affected sometimes the direction of our show.
So policies across the board. So if saying a certain word or whatever scenario lost the audience or offended them in some way.
Right. It was just a knee-jerk panic thing of like, oh, can't do that. Yeah. And there's another process too. We have focus groups, which I think is probably responsible for more dull television than any other single thing. And you have to sit there, and you're in this room behind a mirror, and they've got a test audience, and already you're in trouble because the test audience, they're from LA, half of them are already in the business, they don't want to admit it. It's crazy. And so they've got a dial, and all they have to do is when they like something, turn the dial this way. When they don't like it, turn it that way. So we'd have a scene in the pilot where the two main characters were arguing. Important scene, conflict, arguing, and they don't like it because it's an argument, and these people love each other. They shouldn't be fighting. But you got to have it. It's going to be okay. They're going to make up. It's going to be all right. But that feedback would say, "Oh no, you can't have conflict. People don't. It turns them off. They don't like it. They're going to turn the TV. They're going to turn something else on." So we often have to fight to keep conflict in the show. In fact, if I may, even go a little deeper, in the pilot script originally, the way I had written it was that Melinda, the lead, was about to get married, and she had not yet told her husband that she can see ghosts. And so on the eve of her wedding, she was really in tremendous anguish about how to do this. And she talked at length with his brother, her brother-in-law, about what to do and how to do it and the best way to approach it, And the way she finally broke it to him was she said to him, I was talking to your brother last night. And he says, my brother's been dead for 5 years. And that's how she, and the network said, no, we don't want, she can't keep him in the dark. It's not good. The audience won't like it. It's too much conflict. And I was heartbroken. It's like, you gotta be kidding me. What a great dilemma for this character. So we had to have it that he knew from the beginning. He approved of it. He was fine with it. So I still managed to get the brother in there, but that was the kind of thing that was difficult to hear and to execute. And again, you have to say to yourself, they're successful. They know their audience. We'll give it a try. But ultimately, as they trusted us more, we could push back a little more against their notes. And when they saw the result of the shows, and they were happy with the show, and the shows were doing well, then they did lean back a little bit and not be quite as drastic with their thoughts.